welcome you back. And we're here in the second half of our program with Stephanie Rheinheimer. Stephanie is one of our, I will say social workers, but you all have a new title, and it is?
We do. We are resident services coordinators.
Resident services coordinators. I used to work at first I worked in a personnel office, and then they called us human resources managers, and then they called us human capital something or others.
Okay.
But I just kept saying I work in personnel, and I'm just still going to call you a social worker. And the bottom line is that you people are there to help us.
I would say that's a good kind of blueprint.
No matter what we
phrase
call
for
you,
us.
you're going to be there to help us. And today you're here to help us learn about advance directives.
I think so, yeah.
What is an advance directive?
So an advance directive is a legal document. You can, in the state of Virginia, you can go through a lawyer to pursue getting one, but actually it's really neat. In the state of Virginia, they have one that you can actually find online.
So an advance directive does what?
So an advance directive typically has two components to it, and we can talk about both, but I'll highlight both of them first. The first component is basically designating your healthcare agent or healthcare power of attorney. And then the second component is typically what the phrase is a living will.
So let's back up even one step further.
Perfect.
The whole point of an advance directive is to tell other people how you want them to take care of you at a point when you can't speak for yourself.
Exactly.
Correct?
I couldn't have said it any better.
Okay.
I mean, really, the first component is to make sure that if you're unable to speak on your own behalf, you have designated someone to be your advocate. And then the second section, which we alluded to, the living will, is where you get the opportunity to kind of write down some of your wishes in terms of treatment. So, but you are absolutely right.
Okay.
It's in place for when you are, unfortunately, in certain circumstances, unable maybe to speak on your own behalf.
Okay. So, talking about the first part,
Sure.
when you're saying the healthcare power of attorney, that says, if I can't speak for myself, who do I designate to speak for me?
Exactly. And so there's a couple important things to pay attention to in that part. First and foremost, you actually have the opportunity to list a primary agent, so that would be the first person that someone goes to. But then oftentimes people forget that life happens, and so it's sometimes there is a circumstance where that person may be unavailable. So most documents, in particular the one I'm referencing in the state of Virginia, allow you to name a successor agent. So, and really when you come to start thinking about who you would like to be that person for you, you want to make sure it's someone you trust, someone who is easily accessible, someone who you feel comfortable having those sorts of conversations with, and who you think will be able to put aside their own preferences and really...
That's really important.
Right. We have definitely, unfortunately, have had circumstances where someone gets wrapped up in maybe their own ethics or religion, and you really need to remind them.
Or just in the emotion of the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And so it's definitely not something to take light.
Sometimes it's not necessarily the person who's closest to you who's going to be the best person to make those decisions.
Exactly, and actually we have that conversation. Sometimes spouses are often the most popular choice, but sometimes people choose a sister or a close friend who may be a little bit more emotionally removed in a time of a crisis, could maybe think a little bit more clearly. It really depends on the person and relationship, but yes.
Right. Yes. And I had a personal experience with that recently. A friend of mine died, and her son is my godson.
Okay.
And he came to me at the funeral, and he said, what do you have set up for this kind of a situation? And he said that his mother had designated him as his health care agent, and he was so glad that she had, because her husband, not his father, but her husband had not wanted to make the decisions that needed to be made. He kept thinking, oh, she's going to be all right. She's going to be all right. And that was not what she wanted.
Right.
So it's really important to know what you want and to make those decisions and to designate those people.
Absolutely. And it sounds silly, but I will make a point to mention that you should make sure that the person knows you've chosen that you've chosen them, and that and that they've been informed and are willing to
and
be so.
And if you choose no one, the law will choose someone for you.
So there's, each state varies, but in Virginia, I believe there's a hierarchy, and so it looks like you actually have it in front of you.
There is a hierarchy. In Virginia, it's your guardian if your guardian if court appointed, but if not that, your spouse, then your adult child, either of your parents, your adult brother or sister, other adult relatives, and then it goes on down through close friends, even caregivers.
Right.
And then it could be someone that's court appointed.
Exactly, and so,
So
this
make
is,
your decisions.
exactly,
Yes.
this is the time you can have your
Yes.
voice heard, so.
Yes, get it in writing.
I agree.
Yes,
Right.
And once you have this written down, who do you give this to?
That is very important. So a lot of times people, I don't want to say make the mistake, but they'll put it in like a lockbox with their other important documents. But this is something you want to make sure that you have in a place that's easily accessible for yourself. You want to make sure your designated agents have a copy.
What's a designated
So
agent?
the designated agent is an interchangeable word for the healthcare power of attorney we were just discussing.
So this person that you have designated, you want that person
Yep.
to have it.
You want to make sure all of your physicians, so primary care physician, any sort of specialist you see, oftentimes if there's a hospital, unfortunately, that you frequent, they'll have a copy. Here at Green Spring, social work likes to have a copy, the medical center.
So we should give one to you.
Absolutely. So when you're a new resident, typically we ask for those documents.
And I believe the finance office here also wants to have a copy.
Absolutely. So it's a very well dispensed piece
I
of
know
paper.
every time we go to Fort Belvoir, for every appointment, they ask us, do you have
Right.
an advance directive on file
Right.
here?
Right. I mean, really the purpose behind that is it's easier to make sure everyone has this now rather than waiting for a crisis and trying to rifle through papers and all that fun stuff.
That's right,
So,
yes.
but so that's kind of the first part of the
So
document.
that's the first part, that's the healthcare
Right.
power of attorney. And the second part is,
Well, actually, if we can back up a little, if we have
Okay,
time. So the
sure.
first part, we talked about the agent, and we did talk a little bit about the second part, the living will, but I'll make a
Yes.
point to talk about it a little bit more. So the living will section of the advance directive, so the overarching term is advance directive, and you have the healthcare power of attorney and the living will. And the living will is where you get the opportunity to write down your preferences for different treatments you may or may not want to receive at any sort of kind of crisis or end of life. So for example, oftentimes documents will say I do or do not want a ventilator or intubation, or CPR, those sorts of things. So, and that usually gives you some reassurance that gives some guide to your medical power of attorney if you are no longer able to make those decisions. So I just wanted to slide that in there.
no, and I'm glad you did. So the living will is the second piece.
Piece of the advance directive, yes.
Now, there's an interesting point to this. When EMT people come,
Yes.
do they have that living will? Do they pay attention to that?
So you are good. So that brings us to our next document. So the advance directive we talked about is very necessary and very important. However, to your point, in any sort of emergency, so for example, say here at Green Spring, you call security and they're calling 911 and EMTs come, there's actually a separate piece of paper that medical staff are trained to look for. So they are unfortunately not going to be rifling through your folders and papers to find your advance directive. They're likely going to be looking for what's called a do not resuscitate order, or DNR. And it should be pulled up on the screen here. And that document is actually not something that you self-create or go through a lawyer. It's a medical order, so typically it's a conversation you have with your primary care physician, or oftentimes if someone's in the hospital, they'll talk to the hospital physician, and they will generate the medical order and provide that piece of paper to you. And if you have questions, you can ask, or I can go ahead and explain it, whichever.
Go ahead.
So the DNR really is kind of focused on one thing, and that would be your wishes on whether or not you want to receive CPR. So it's really pointing to if you have a cardiac or respiratory arrest, your preference on whether or not you want to receive that cardiopulmonary resuscitation, so things like the chest compressions or the defibrillator, intubation, ventilator, things like that. And so if you choose to get the DNR, you are saying, you know what, I actually do not wish to get CPR and those things, but please keep me comfortable, make sure I get things to alleviate pain, supplemental oxygen, IV fluids, things like that.
So the reason I was rifling through my papers here was that what I was reading here was that the EMTs, the emergency medical technicians, cannot honor the living wills.
Correct.
But what you're telling us is that if you have a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, and the emergency medical technicians see it,
Exactly.
they can honor that.
Yes, and that's because it's a medical order.
But that's okay, so the living will and the healthcare power of attorney, those are documents that you can fill out yourself. You can find those papers online or in other places, or you can fill them out with your lawyer. But the do not resuscitate order, you can get the form online, but you must have it signed by your doctor.
Correct. That is all correct.
Yes. And these should be updated every so often?
So the DNR is kind of a one-stop shop. It'll follow you unless you change your mind. It is advisable just to continue to have conversations in regards to your advance directive in case your preferences change or you want to choose a different person to represent you. And of course, you're welcome to revoke this document or update it at any time.
Now, you said some words there that made me stop and think about something. You said they will follow you.
Yes.
Now, what about if I go on vacation to another state?
Right.
And I don't have these with me?
Well, I would probably suggest to add on your vacation pack list to bring this with you if you think about it.
Will these be honored in another state?
So I think that is a good question, actually. You may have stumped me. So my understanding is that as long as it was created appropriately within the state that it was created, that it should follow you. Now, each state does have their own version of this, but I would say if I'm vacationing in Maryland, I would hope that they would honor the Virginia one.
I did read one I was reading about this online, and one thing said that exactly what you said, that most states will honor them.
Right.
But if you spend a lot, like some people go to another state for, say, 6 months of the year, if you spend a long time in a state
right.
During a year, and it's like people who go to Florida for many months during the year,
Snowbirds.
Maybe it would be a good idea to have a set of those documents that have been made up for that state.
Absolutely. And I would say to that point, they probably, or hopefully it would be advisable to have connections with the medical team down there too for that reason, and so you can have that conversation with them.
So for those of us here at Green Spring, now I'll just use myself as an example. I have these documents. I should have them with my doctors. I should have them with the hospital that I frequent the most, a set in the medical center, a set with you, and I just knocked myself on the head because there was one piece that I forgot to bring with me this morning. And there's one other piece of this, and that is the importance of organ donation.
Yes.
That should be in the living will, but also there's another piece of it, and that is that if you are going to donate your body, after death, that paperwork should also be in there.
Absolutely, and actually the Virginia form that we've been mentioning has a small section in the back that has
for that. Okay.
But also a lot of times people, like we said, will have separate paperwork for that through whichever hospital they're going to be donating it to.
So we want to have these on. So I forget where I was. I think I got to the finance office. We got to you. If you have children, you probably want to have a copy with each child. If you have a lawyer, you want to have a copy with your lawyer.
Hopefully they have their records, but yes.
And all of these should be in a package, in a plastic file, either on your refrigerator or on your door.
Right.
So that if emergency people come to your apartment, they can grab them.
And I would say even more important than the advance directive, which yes should be easily accessible, the DNR for sure should be on your refrigerator or the door, because that's where they're trained to look.
And not everybody will have a DNR.
Exactly. I mean, that is, I would say the advance directive is something everybody should have. A DNR is not a choice everyone makes at any time.
Okay. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Boy, are we out of time already?
We educated ourselves, didn't we?
I think we did.
I think we learned a lot. Good, and this is always good to review these every so often.
And I'll just make a quick plug. If anyone has questions, social work here at Green Spring, we've got good resources, information, and can provide guidance on these sorts of things.
And you service the people in Neighborhood 1, which is what buildings?
Parkview, Grove Terrace, Madison Green, and Walden Court.
And Neighborhood 2?
So, oh boy, you're going to trip me up. So
Sue
Frankie is here in Village Square, and I don't even know if I have them all memorized. Jackson Court, Forest View, she has some Maple Creek and Hampton Place. And then you have Elena Keitel in Hunter's Crossing, and she does Canterbury Square, Oak Hill, Crestwood Court.
And everything we haven't said.
The other Maple Creek.
Okay. And you're all here to help.
We are, yes.
Okay.